Let me describe someone to you and see if this sounds familiar. She's 32 years old, making $68,000 a year as a project manager. She's got $18,000 in credit card debt spread across 3 cards, a car payment, and student loans. Every month, she makes her payments on time. Every single one. She's never missed a deadline, never been late, never defaulted. She's doing exactly what the financial experts tell you to do. She's being responsible. And yet, 3 years later, she's still got $16,500 in credit card debt. She's paid thousands of dollars, sacrificed vacations, skipped dinners with friends, and put her life on hold to attack this debt. But the balance barely moved. If you've ever looked at your debt payoff progress and thought, "We're working so hard but getting nowhere," you're about to understand why. Oh, let me introduce myself. They call me Mr. Ben, and I spend way too much time thinking about why aggressive debt payoff strategies often keep people in debt longer than slower, more strategic approaches. If you're someone grinding to pay off debt as fast as possible and you can't figure out why you're still stuck, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if this helps you out. Here's the thing. We've been sold this story that the faster you pay off debt, the better. It seems mathematically obvious, right? If you throw every spare dollar at your debt, you'll be free sooner. Attack it with intensity. Live on beans and rice. Get a second job. Sell everything. Pay it off as fast as humanly possible. That's just basic math and willpower. Except, that's not what actually happens for most people. What actually happens is one of the most counterintuitive traps in personal finance, and almost nobody talks about it. The term I'm using here is the debt cycle, and it describes the phenomenon where people who aggressively pay down their debt end up back in debt, often worse than before, while people who take a slower, more sustainable approach actually become debt-free and stay that way. Having an aggressive payoff mentality doesn't make you financially secure. For many people, it makes them more vulnerable. It makes them more likely to end up right back where they started, or worse. Let me take you back to what actually happens when someone decides to get serious about debt for a second, because understanding the psychology is crucial to understanding the trap. According to research published in the Journal of Marketing Research, when people face multiple debts, they instinctively want to see progress. They want wins. They want to cross something off the list. This is called debt account aversion, and it's why the debt snowball method, paying off the smallest balance first, regardless of interest rate, works for so many people psychologically. That small victory, that paid-off account, triggers a dopamine response in your brain. It feels good. It feels like progress. And here's what most people don't realize. That feeling becomes addictive. You start chasing that high. You start making more and more extreme sacrifices to pay off the next debt, and the next one, and the next one. You cut your budget to the bone. You work extra hours. You eliminate everything that brings you joy because you're in debt payoff mode and nothing else matters until you're free. And for a while, it works. The balances go down. You're making progress. You feel like you're finally taking control of your financial life after years of feeling powerless. The problem is, you're also creating a pressure cooker. According to data from credit counseling organizations, people who adopt extremely restrictive budgets to pay off debt faster have significantly higher relapse rates. They get the debt paid off, or close to it, and then something happens. The car breaks down. The furnace dies. They get sick. Their kid needs braces. Or sometimes nothing happens at all. They just burn out. They've been living like they're broke for 2 years while making $65,000 a year, and they just can't do it anymore. They snap. They take a vacation they can't afford. They buy something they've been denying themselves. They go out to eat because they're exhausted from meal prepping every single meal for 18 months. And just like that, they're back on the credit card. The cycle starts again. Now, you might be thinking, Mr. Ben, those people just don't have discipline. They didn't stick with it long enough. If they had just pushed through, they would have made it. And look, maybe you're right about some of them. But let me walk you through the math and psychology of what actually happens to create this cycle. And I want you to be honest with yourself about whether this applies to your situation. Let's say you've got $20,000 in credit card debt at 22% APR spread across 3 cards. You decide you're going to attack this aggressively. You're going to pay it off in 2 years instead of 5. To do that, you need to pay about $1,000 a month instead of the $500 you'd pay on a more moderate plan. That extra $500 per month has to come from somewhere. So you cut everything. No restaurants, no entertainment, no new clothes unless something literally falls apart. You cancel subscriptions. You stop seeing friends because everything costs money. You turn down invitations to weddings because you can't afford the travel. Your entire life becomes about debt payoff. For the first 6 months, you're riding high on motivation. You pay off that first credit card, it feels amazing. You're doing it. You're going to be debt-free. By month 9, it's getting harder. You're tired, you're isolated, you haven't done anything fun in almost a year. But you push through because you're so close. You can see the finish line. By month 15, you're running on fumes. You've paid off 2 of the 3 cards, you've got $7,000 left, but you're exhausted. And then your transmission fails. $2,500 in repairs. You don't have it. You haven't been building an emergency fund because every dollar has gone to debt payoff. So you put it on the credit card you just paid off. The one you closed the account on mentally. The one that represented freedom. And now you're back at $2,500 in debt on that card. But it gets worse. Because now you're demoralized. You worked so hard, you sacrificed so much, and you're right back where you started. Or so it feels. The psychological impact of that setback is devastating. Research from behavioral economics shows that people who experience setbacks in debt repayment often overcorrect in the opposite direction. They go from extreme restriction to extreme spending. It's called the what the heck effect. You've already broken the diet, so you might as well eat the whole cake. You've already put $2,500 on the card, so what's another $500 for that thing you've been wanting? What's another $300 for a nice dinner because you deserve it after all that sacrifice? Within 3 months, you're back to $5,000 in debt. Within 6 months, you're back to $8,000. Within a year, you're right back where you started, but now you're also defeated. You tried the aggressive approach, you did everything right, and it didn't work. So why bother trying again?
This is the debt cycle. And it's not a personal failure. It's a predictable psychological and mathematical trap that happens when you prioritize speed over sustainability. Here's what makes it even more insidious. The credit card companies know about this cycle. They've studied it. They've optimized for it. According to data from the Federal Reserve, credit card companies make most of their profit not from people who pay their balances in full every month, and not from people who only make minimum payments and stay in debt forever. They make the most money from people who yo-yo, the people who pay down their balances, then run them back up, then pay them down again, because those are the people who pay the most in total interest over time. They're engaged enough to make large payments, which means they have income, but they're also vulnerable enough to fall back into debt, which means they'll keep paying interest for years or decades. Let's look at the minimum payment trap specifically, because this is where the cycle becomes really clear. Most people know that making only minimum payments is bad. The math is brutal. If you owe $10,000 on a credit card with a 22% APR and you only pay the minimum payment of 2% of the balance each month, your first payment is $200. But here's the thing most people don't realize. Of that $200, about $183 goes to interest. Only $17 goes to your actual balance. Your $10,000 debt is now $9,983. Next month, you pay another $200. Again, most of it is interest. At this rate, it would take you more than 50 years to pay off the debt, and you'd pay over $22,000 in interest alone. That's more than double what you originally borrowed. Everyone knows this is a trap. Financial experts have been screaming about it for decades. Don't make minimum payments. Pay as much as you can. Attack the debt aggressively.
So people do the opposite.
They pay way more than the minimum. They pay $500, $800, $1,000 a month on a $10,000 balance. And mathematically, yes, they're going to pay it off faster and pay less in total interest. If you pay $500 a month on that same $10,000 debt, you'll be done in about 2 years and pay roughly $2,500 in interest instead of $22,000. That's a massive difference. That's what every financial calculator will tell you. That's what every debt payoff guru will tell you. Pay it off fast. But here's what the calculators don't account for: life. The calculators assume you'll make that $500 payment every single month for 24 months without fail. They assume nothing will go wrong. They assume you won't get tired. They assume you won't have an emergency. They assume you're a robot who can sustain maximum effort indefinitely. But you're not a robot. You're a human being with a finite amount of willpower, energy, and resources. Studies on debt repayment behavior show that people who set aggressive payoff timelines have failure rates of over 60%. They don't make it to the finish line, not because they're lazy or undisciplined, but because they built a plan that wasn't sustainable. They didn't account for the psychological toll of extreme restriction. They didn't build in margin for unexpected expenses. They didn't preserve their emergency fund. They put all their eggs in the debt payoff basket, and when one thing went wrong, the whole plan collapsed. Meanwhile, people who set slower, more sustainable timelines, say paying that same $10,000 debt over 3 or 4 years instead of 2, have success rates over 80%. They're more likely to actually finish. They're more likely to stay out of debt after they finish. They're more likely to build wealth over the long term. Why? Because they built sustainability into the plan. They're still paying more than the minimum. They're still making progress, but they're also maintaining an emergency fund. They're also allowing themselves small pleasures so they don't burn out. They're also preserving relationships and mental health. They're playing the long game instead of sprinting toward a finish line they might not reach. And here's the really counterintuitive part. Even though they're taking longer to pay off the debt, they often end up better off financially 5 or 10 years down the road because they didn't relapse. They didn't end up back in the cycle. They actually broke free and stayed free. The person who takes 4 years to pay off $20,000 in debt and never goes back into debt is in a better position than the person who pays it off in 2 years but ends up back at $15,000 in debt 3 years later. Now, let's talk about the psychological trap of debt account aversion, because this is where aggressive payoff strategies can actually work against you in unexpected ways. Remember, debt account aversion is the tendency to want to close out individual accounts rather than minimize total interest paid. It's why the debt snowball method, where you pay off the smallest balance first, works so well psychologically, even though the debt avalanche method, where you pay off the highest interest rate first, saves more money mathematically. Researchers found that people who use the snowball method are 15% more likely to become completely debt-free because those small wins keep them motivated. The problem comes when you become addicted to those wins, when closing accounts becomes the goal instead of building financial stability. I've seen people drain their emergency funds to pay off a small credit card because they wanted the psychological victory of having one less account. Then a month later, they have an emergency and have to put it right back on that card, or worse, take out a payday loan at 400% interest because they don't have the credit available anymore. This is what I call winning the battle but losing the war. And it's a phrase that actually comes from that same research on debt psychology. You close the account. You get the win. You feel amazing for a week, but you've made yourself more vulnerable, not less. You've traded long-term financial security for a short-term psychological boost. And credit card companies love this. They absolutely love it because they know you'll be back. The data shows that people who close accounts and then reopen them or open new accounts end up paying more in interest over their lifetime than people who just steadily paid down the balances without closing accounts, because every time you restart, you reset the interest clock. You lose momentum. You lose the progress you made. Here's what really gets me.
The expenses that trap people in the debt cycle aren't luxury expenses. They're not boats and vacations and frivolous spending, at least not primarily. They're normal life expenses. The car repair, the medical bill, the broken appliance, the job loss, the things that happen to everyone eventually. Look at emergency expenses specifically, because this is where the aggressive payoff approach becomes most dangerous. According to the Federal Reserve, nearly 40% of Americans couldn't cover a $400 emergency expense without borrowing or selling something. And many of those people are in the middle of aggressive debt payoff plans. They've allocated every dollar to debt. They have no cushion. So when the $400 expense hits, or the $1,000 expense, or the $3,000 expense, they have no choice but to go back into debt. And now they're not just back in debt, they're demoralized, they're defeated, they feel like failures. The psychological damage from that can be worse than the financial damage.
The alternative approach, the one that actually works long-term, is what I call sustainable debt reduction with margin. You don't attack debt as fast as humanly possible. You attack it as fast as sustainably possible while preserving financial stability. Here's what that looks like in practice. Instead of putting every extra dollar toward debt, you split it. Half toward debt, half toward building a small emergency fund. Not a 6-month emergency fund, not even a 3-month emergency fund, just $1,000 to start, then $2,000, then $3,000. Enough to handle most common emergencies without derailing your whole plan. Once you hit that baseline emergency fund, then you can be more aggressive with debt payoff. But you maintain that cushion, you protect it, you only use it for real emergencies, and you replenish it before resuming aggressive debt payments.
This requires patience. It means your debt payoff will take longer on paper. If you're splitting your extra money between debt and emergency savings, you might pay off that $20,000 in 3 years instead of 2. You might pay an extra $800 in interest over that time. But here's the payoff. You're way more likely to actually finish. You're way more likely to stay out of debt afterward. You're way less likely to have a financial emergency destroy all your progress. That extra $800 in interest is insurance. It's the premium you pay to protect yourself from the cycle, and it's worth every penny because the cost of relapse is way higher than $800. If you pay off the debt in 2 years but end up back in debt 2 years later, you'll pay thousands more in interest over your lifetime compared to someone who took 3 years but never went back.
I want to leave you with one final thought, because I think it reframes this whole conversation. The debt cycle isn't really about debt. It's about sustainability. It's about building financial habits that you can maintain for life, not just for a debt payoff sprint. It's about having the wisdom to know that slow and steady beats fast and fragile every single time. Our culture glorifies intensity. We love the story of someone who paid off $50,000 in debt in 18 months by working 3 jobs and eating rice and beans. That's the story that goes viral. That's the story that gets the book deal. But what we don't see is what happens 2 years later. Did they stay out of debt? Did they maintain the habits? Or did they burn out and end up right back where they started? The research suggests that most extreme debt payoff stories don't have happy endings long term.
The people who actually thrive financially aren't the ones who pay off debt the fastest. They're the ones who pay off debt sustainably while building financial stability. They're the ones who refuse to sacrifice their emergency fund on the altar of debt payoff speed. They're the ones who built margin into their plan so they could handle life's inevitable surprises without derailing everything. They're the ones who understood that personal finance is a marathon, not a sprint. You can grind your way out of debt, but if you grind so hard that you end up right back in it, you haven't actually solved the problem. You've just participated in the cycle that keeps millions of Americans trapped for decades.
The question isn't how fast can you pay off your debt. The question is, how can you pay off your debt in a way that actually sticks?
How can you build a debt payoff plan that's intense enough to make real progress, but sustainable enough that you'll actually finish and stay out of debt forever? How can you escape the cycle instead of just running faster on the treadmill? That's the real question. And the answer isn't more intensity. It's more sustainability. It's more margin. It's more wisdom about what actually works over the long haul versus what just feels good in the moment. Now you know why paying off debt faster sometimes keeps you in debt longer. The question is what you're going to do about it. If this video helped you see debt payoff differently, make sure to smash that like button and subscribe for more content that challenges how you think about money.